In the last several weeks, a lot of information relating to the FBI's Russia investigation has been declassified and made public. That's in a large part thanks to Attorney General Barr, action he has taken, and action taken by Acting Director Grinnell, DNI, on declassification of a lot of things that should have been declassified a long time ago. Their acts of transparency are finally shining a light on the dark corners of the federal government. The public's business ought to be public. There's too much over-classification in the federal government. Barr and Grinnell are doing what they ought to do, and I hope they keep it up. In the last several weeks, we've also seen a lot of denial from some quarters in the media about the information that's been released. Also last week, former President Obama said the rule of law is at risk because of the Justice Department's dismissal of the Flynn case. And contrary to what President Obama believes or the media might say, I believe the opposite is true. The rule of law is at risk if the federal government can get away with violating the Constitution to do what they did to Lieutenant General Flynn. And when it comes to those violations and other misconduct by former government officials, Obama and the mainstream media pundits, they all seem to be silent all of a sudden. I've heard no comment from Mr. Obama about the independent Inspector General's findings that Andrew McCabe lied under oath to federal investigators multiple times. Or I haven't heard about how Department of Justice prosecutors falsely told the court that they had produced all Brady material to Flynn. Or I haven't heard them when the federal government surveilled an American citizen connected to the Trump campaign without probable cause and based on intelligence that the FBI knew was questionable at best. Too much silence on something that now is so obvious. Since 2017, I've aggressively pursued the Flynn investigation to find out more about why the FBI decided to interview Flynn, make him a subject of an investigation, and then why the Justice Department eventually charged him. From the beginning, I wanted to know the facts of the case. And from the beginning, none of what I found looked right. Having done good government oversight for over 40 years, I know a government foul-up when I see it. The public knows a lot more than it did in 2017 when the news first broke about this Flynn case. For example, we know on January 4th, 2017, the FBI wrote a closing memorandum on Flynn, who was codenamed Crossfire Razor by the FBI, and that memorandum said the intelligence community could find no derogatory information on the general. On the very same day the FBI was ready to close the Flynn case, Peter Strzok asked another FBI agent something like this: "Hey, if you haven't closed Razor, don't do it yet." End of quote. So Strzok obviously had another agenda. The case was still open at that moment, and Strzok asked that it be kept open quote unquote, for now. Strzok then quickly messaged Lisa Page saying that Razor still happened to be open because of some oversight and said, quote, yeah, our utter incompetence actually helps us 20% of the time, end of quote. During the course of my oversight activities of the FBI, I've uncovered and made public large amounts of Strzok's and Page's messages. When reviewing all the faults and disasters of the Russia investigation, these text messages are very, very important. They're the free expression of these top FBI employees' mindset, unencumbered by rules or decorum. They give us a look at what the drivers of the rural Russia investigation actually believed. In August 2016, just after the FBI opened the Russia investigation, Page said, quote, Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right, end of quote. She's the one who edited Flynn's 302 summary along with Strzok, which contradicted the original 302. Strzok responded to the Page quote that I just gave this way about whether or not Trump would ever become president. Quote, no, no, he won't. We will stop it. We'll stop it. Their animus towards Trump helps to explain why they cut corners and why they didn't follow regular protocol in running their inquiry. On January the 5th, 2017, the day that Strzok moved to keep the Flynn case open, President Obama met with Director Comey, Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, Vice President Biden, and National Security Advisor Susan Rice. At that meeting, they briefed President Obama on the Russia investigation. It's unclear to what extent they discussed the details of the investigation amongst each other, but given all that we know now regarding the fake foundation to the inquiry, it's time we ask, what did Obama and Biden know, and when did they know it? During the course of my oversight, I acquired an email from Susan Rice. She sent herself an email on Obama's last day in office, January the 20th, 2017. That email memorized the alleged contents of the January 5th, 2017 meeting with Obama that I previously referred to. As I noted in 2018 when I made the email public, I found it very odd that among her activities in the final moments of the final day of the Obama administration, that she would write herself an email about a meeting that happened several weeks prior about this investigation. According to Rice, Obama wanted everything done, quote unquote, by the book. Of course, we now know that never happened. She also said in part, quote, the president, as in Obama, asked Comey to inform him of anything changes in the next few weeks that should affect how we share classified information with the incoming team, end of quote. Then 1 week later, on January the 12th, 2017, somebody in the Obama administration leaked the Flynn Kislyak call to the Washington Post that for the very first time ignited rumors about Flynn's association with Russians and a possible violation of the arcane Logan Act. Now, wasn't this really a perfectly timed leak? One that would help create a fake foundation to interview Flynn. Well, guess what happened? 12 days later, on January the 24th, 2017, Strzok interviewed Flynn in the White House. Prior to that interview, Comey chose not to follow normal protocols to inform the White House that the FBI intended to interview an employee. Now, we all know that the FBI would normally work through the White House counsel to have discussions for approval and who would be present at that interview. Now, you've seen it on television several times this weekend. Comey bragging about getting away with skirting the rules. When he was asked in a 2018 interview about how he did it, Comey said, and this is what showed up in these last weekends, I sent them, meaning he sent the FBI agents to interview. So I'll start over again. I sent them, something I probably wouldn't have done or even got away with in a more organized investigation, a more organized administration, end of quote. According to Comey's former assistant, Comey said, quote, we just decided, screw it, end of quote, in reference to their breaking protocol with the White House. Now, I referred to an email that said the president wanted to do this by the book. Well, what I just described to you is hardly by the book. Flynn was never told during this interview that he was being secretly interrogated for what he was being secretly interrogated for, and the whole thing was done without Flynn having an attorney present. In fact, I think I recall they even told him he didn't need an attorney. Now we know that the FBI had no real investigative purpose to interview Flynn. We also know, based upon FBI notes, that agents apparently interviewed Flynn to trick him in a lie so that they could prosecute him or get him fired. And that prosecuting him or getting him fired are very clear in some notes that we got from the FBI, handwritten notes. Keep in mind, the FBI had prepared to close this case weeks before, except it didn't quite get closed because Strzok came in and said, can we keep it open, or something to that effect. The FBI already had the transcript of the Flynn Ambassador Kislyak call. They knew exactly what was discussed. So what was the point of interviewing Flynn if they already had the transcript? Well, lucky for Strzok, the FBI had not technically closed the Flynn case, so he figured yet they could lay a trap for Flynn, and they did lay a trap. In doing so, they didn't warn him that he was under investigation. They went around the Justice Department, and I made it very clear how they bypassed the White House on interview protocols because Comey was bragging on television about that. Under Comey's leadership, the FBI abused government power in ways that our founders and framers feared most. Because they had enough of George III. They wasn't going to let it happen again in the United States. That's why they wrote the Constitution the way they did. The Russia investigation, in other words, is a textbook example of what not to do. At every step of the investigation, the government sought evidence to advance it, never got the evidence that they needed to advance it, and advanced the investigation anyway. Pretty clearly, an abuse of power. Let's recall that Comey also leaked his memos of his private discussion with President Trump to get the special counsel Mueller appointed. Comey's pretty smart. He had a plan. It worked. And that plan worked to get Mueller appointed. Mueller did his work for 2 years, and it cost the taxpayers $30 million. And in the end, Mueller found no collusion and no obstruction, which is exactly the same information that the House Intelligence Committee's 50-plus depositions told us. And those were done way back, not way back, but a little way back in 2017. Mueller finished his job 2019. That's more than $30 million just to reinvent the wheel. Now, with respect to Comey, I think it's monumentally important to point out a piece of his testimony from 2017 before the House Intelligence Committee. Comey said the following, quote, "We had an open counterintelligence investigation on Mr. Flynn, and it had been open since the summertime, and we were very close to closing it. In fact, I think I had authorized it to be closed at the end of December, beginning of January," end of quote. Now, Comey leaked his memos so that the public would know the president allegedly said to him that he hoped Comey would let the whole Flynn thing go. That's what the hook was to getting a special counsel appointed. Not once in Comey's memos did he mention that by the time that conversation occurred, he had already authorized the Flynn case to be closed. Don't you think that's a material fact that would put the proper context on his interactions with Trump? Attorney General Barr is exactly right. What the FBI did to Flynn cannot be justified by any angle of review. What the FBI did is flout the rule of law and the Constitution. Entrapment is unconstitutional. That's where the outrage ought to be, not on the dismissal of the case, but on the facts the case was brought in the first place and a good man's life being destroyed. Mueller had all these facts. He had documents. He had the Brady material. He had the FBI notes and contradictory 302 summaries. He had the emails. He had all the information that showed Flynn was set up, targeted, and pressured to plead guilty in a secret side deal between the Mueller team and his former lawyers, only because he was running out of money and the government was coming after his son. Flynn did what maybe a lot of people would do when your family is at stake. Flynn did what he did to save his family from financial ruin and his son from reputational ruin. He did what any father would do for his family. If it can happen to Flynn, it can happen to you. It can happen to any American. And in some ways, this also happened to a person, not to forget, a Carter Page and the illegal surveillance on Carter Page. You know, in this business of self-government, in this business of constitutional safeguards, we still are in a constant battle between liberty and tyranny. and we've seen some tyranny in regard to Flynn. My fellow Americans, let's use the Russia investigation and all of its shortcomings to forever guard against the tyranny of federal government. One last thing. People are constantly phoning our offices, wanting to know when all the people that did the injustice to Flynn were going to be prosecuted, because they think there's two standards of justice. You know, McCabe, they announced he isn't going to be prosecuted yesterday, but Flynn was entrapped to be prosecuted. And how wrong that is. And a lot of people want justice brought to the people that did the injustice. And I think they ought to be prosecuted. But even more important than prosecuting him, it's about time that these facts get out so the public knows the injustice that's going on within our government, within the FBI, the highest levels of the FBI. We aren't finding fault with the FBI, the people that are doing what needs to be done to bring law and order to our country. But when we have these unusual, illegal, unconstitutional, corrupt things that happen to Flynn, it ought to wake up the American people, but it ought to wake up those of us in government to make sure it never happens again.